One of my ancestors that served in the Revolutionary War had a really fascinating life, and I've run across some documentation about him that I want to share. A good part of this I'll be reading from some historical documents and sharing some thoughts about that. As I said, he served in the Revolutionary War. He was actually present at Yorktown when Cornwallis surrendered, and there's some information about that which I find fascinating. We're going to pick up a little later after he has a family and he's getting his life settled down. He made enough money to outfit and join a party of immigrants for Kentucky. They made the journey to Kentucky by way of the Cumberland Gap and the Wilderness Route. Now, I've driven through the Cumberland Gap. There's an interstate highway there. Probably took me a few minutes to get across that as compared to likely days that it would take a man and couple horses and his wife and child to get across it. So there was an aha moment when I read that. Anyway, Wilderness Route, his young wife Jane rode on horseback and carried her baby Reuben in her lap. He walked and led or drove another horse packed with all their worldly effects except his faithful hound and his rifle, which he carried on his shoulder. I'm guessing you couldn't carry a rifle on your shoulder through the Cumberland Gap these days. Nevertheless, in 1787, he secured 300 acres of land in Madison County, Kentucky, in the midst of a rich cane brake, and he built his cabin there. He got his start making salt and trading with immigrants. There was no money in the country, and salt was scarce and in great demand. It took the place of a circulating medium. It became a measure of value, as tobacco did in Virginia. So basically, there wasn't coins or paper money out in the country, maybe in the cities. So commodities became actual trade goods. Salt was treated like money. So realizing the value of salt, he provided himself with 2 brass kettles. And with his 2 horses and his rifle, he traveled west to Bullitt's Salt Lick, a total distance through Indian country of 75 miles. Now, this is a historical record. He made salt by evaporating the salt water, and when he'd made about 6 bushels of salt, a load for his 2 horses, he would return to his home and trade with the immigrants. A peck of salt at that time was worth the price of a yearling calf, and it was in such demand that he soon had 15 to 20 head of cattle, and he repeated those trips to the Salt Lick. In a few years, he had acquired a large number of cattle, which he fattened with the cane and wild pea vine. Eventually, a government fort was established near where Cincinnati now stands, and a government agent bought from him a large number of his cattle for beef for the soldiers, paying him the first money he had found since coming to Kentucky. He continued to prosper until he owned over 1,000 acres of fine bluegrass land. He traded largely in mules, cattle, and hogs, which he collected and sent to market on foot, driven by some of his sons, often to Cincinnati, Louisiana, Richmond, Virginia, or Charleston, South Carolina. He was the father of 19 children. 19. 16 sons and 3 daughters, and all but one lived to be grown and married, 12 by his first wife, Jane, and 7 by his second wife, Nancy, whom he married when he was 58 years old. There were no mills in those days. Hand mills were used to grind corn for bread, and hominy was made with a mortar. The baby's cradle would be made from cutting down a buckeye tree and cutting it out like a sugar trow, however you say that. I'm not really sure how you say that. He loved to relate that he was one of the guards that marched off the British prisoners after the surrender of Cornwallis in Yorktown. He loved to tell how his heart swelled with pride as the ragged, barefoot colonial troops marched off as their prisoners, the splendidly uniformed British soldiers. Now that must have really been a sight, and for those that had fought those long, cold battles through years, must have felt tremendously rewarded. As a person, he had light hair, blue eyes, and was of a florid complexion. He was over 6 feet in height and weighed some 220 pounds. If you imagine that at that time, he must have been a really big guy compared to the average man at that age. He was a great hunter, and most of his sons loved the hounds and the chase. So you can still see that British influence at that time. 8 of his sons settled in Missouri before it was a state and reared large and influential families. He was buried on his estate. A brick vault was made in the grave, and large flat rocks covered his coffin. Such was the life of one of my ancestors, who was a Revolutionary War hero and had a very adventurous and very full life. The Lewis and Clark trip hadn't even happened yet. That didn't happen till 1806, somewhere in there. So really, even moving to Kentucky was out there. At that time, that was the Wild West. His life, completely different than ours, and it would have taken a lot of grit to do the things that he did. Doing some genealogy work with my mom, we ran across a treasure trove of these kind of documents and records and letters and firsthand and secondhand recollections dating back this far and even a little further. So if these connect and people enjoy them, I'll do more of them. I could literally turn it into a series if people are really interested in that. Thanks for watching, and I'd love to hear comments and if there's really interest. Thanks.